Welcome back to the Deep 404. A lot of news today on social media has had to do with the United States, of course, to do with Tucker Carlson and his interview with President Putin, which, as I'm recording this, I think is either happening or has just happened but hasn't yet been released. It's going to be released on X, formerly Twitter. It will receive millions of views. Tucker Carlson's interview with Donald Trump, this is after he left Fox Television, received somewhere in the realm of 120 million views. When he was at Fox, very popular there on his show, I think he was maybe getting 1 or 2 million views or something like that to his episodes, perhaps something like that. Now he's getting far orders of magnitude more than that. So this interview with Putin is going to be huge. I think it will be very revealing for a lot of Western people to watch President Putin sit down now after 2 years of him being really demonized in the Western press, to have someone like Tucker ask him some questions and just let him answer them. I think it'll be interesting to watch. That's taken up a lot of the space. Of course, the other big news out of America is of the two funding bills that are going through. There's one from the Senate, which looks to provide $118 billion of funding, which will cover things like $64 billion to Ukraine, $16 billion to Israel, about $4 or $5 billion to support Taiwan, and then some money to address issues on the southern border. That one is still in flight, but looking very shaky. Mike Johnson, the House Speaker, has already said that from what he is aware of the bill so far, if it arrives on his desk, it'll be dead on arrival. It will still allow 2 million people a day illegally, 2 million people a year illegally to cross the border. And this is not something that the House Republicans are okay with. The other interesting news, just on this topic of funding, was that a separate independent bill had been raised by a Republican House Appropriations Committee. And they had raised a bill to say, let's fund Israel $17 billion independently of this big budget item with Ukraine and border security tied into it, because we don't think that will necessarily go ahead. So we'll try and get some money for Israel off the side. Interestingly, that failed. That was voted on today and failed in the House. I believe there were 4 Republican House members who voted with the Democrats on that one. And so that didn't proceed. Now, that is interesting, given the power that Israel has over the United States. I thought that that one may have got through. Anyhow, it hasn't. Be interesting to see some of the feedback now coming from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and what he has to say about that. It's also putting a lot more pressure on this other bill to now get through, which adds some assistance to Ukraine possibly getting some funding, because they're all tied up together. However, Mike Johnson has said if it still is worded the way that it's worded at the moment, it won't go ahead. So anyhow, that's taken up a lot of news. Some interesting Ukraine things. There are some reports in some Telegram channels that in Zolochev, in the Kharkov region yesterday, that there was a Russian missile strike on a private hotel. There have been a number of these strikes on hotels and accommodation sites during the course of the conflict in the last year. Certainly, there's been a number of them, and they have been reported as being strikes on foreign mercenaries or gathering of troops. This one, on the preliminary reporting that came out, was suggesting that there may have been up to 50 VSU officers in the hospital. VSU, in an acronym for the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Some of the information that came through with these early reports were that they believe that, given that these people were in a hotel, being kept in a hotel, that they are likely to be officers, management level, not just general soldiers, but ones with some level of seniority. There have been a couple of reports on that. I haven't seen a great deal of it. I haven't had a great opportunity today to look deeper into that one to see if more news is coming out about that. But I'll keep an eye on it and I'll report on it again in coming days if there is more to that story. Avdeevka is the other big thing at the moment in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Now, Avdeevka has been fought over very heavily. It's been involved in fighting since 2014. That has been fortified since that time. Avdeevka is a long, thin strip of a township with a coke plant, a processing plant at the end of it. I'll just jump to our other map here so that you can have a look. Right, this is Avdeevka on our map here. I'll just zoom out a little bit so you can kind of see it in its entirety. It's this long sort of strip in here. The last 24 hours have seen major Russian advances. Now, over the last 2 months, the Russians have approached from the east, the south, the southwest, and have even curled around the sort of the top and the north of Avdeevka. What appears to have happened in the last 24 hours or so is that Russian forces have been able to push down. They have assumed control all around this lake. This is an old quarry lake which has become full of water. They have assumed control around it to the south and around it to the north and northwest, and have been able to push down through these streets here. Now, last night, so a few hours ago, reports were that the Russians had reached Donetska Street, this street here, and were fighting in the street with the Ukrainian forces, and that they were at that stage about 840 metres away from this road here, the Industrial Prospect road along here. Now, what's very important about that is that road there is the supply road feeding Avdeevka. The road comes in along here and then breaks down, goes left and goes right, and it's feeding into here. Now, there is a train station just here, and there are reports from just a few hours ago, earlier today, that the Russians are either taking control or have taken control of the train station also. Avdeevka, it seems, is now effectively, or about to be, cut in half. The remaining areas in the southern areas, the Dhaka and the industrial areas down here, the Russians have been eating away at the flanks of these areas as well, but there are still some areas in there untaken. And the coke plant area itself up here. This is where if the Ukrainian forces in here have sufficient reserves and supplies to continue the fight, this is where the big fight will happen over the coke plant. Due to its fortified nature. It's a big concrete and steel conglomeration of buildings to begin with that have been reinforced as the fighting has been approaching. So Avdeevka appears to almost be cut in half now, meaning the Russians can now swoop around the bottom of the coke plant and will then be able to cut off supplies of all supplies into Avdeevka. The only remaining opportunity to get supplies into Avdeevka would be to verge off this road and try to cross through the fields here. Single men may be able to do that with some success, but they're not going to be able to carry in any level of supplies or ammunition. Driving vehicles across there, they're going to be slow going across those fields, and they'll be targeted by the Russians. The remaining Ukrainian soldiers in here are in a real bucket of hell now. They have to either by some miraculous way find a way to push the Russians back through all this freshly claimed territory and be able to re-establish their supply lines. This seems unlikely. The Russians have been attacking from all directions around Avdeevka, which has not allowed the Ukrainians to pull reserves from one area to another. It's very difficult for the Ukrainians to be able to send supplies in. As I've said, the Russians now control areas up around here on the southwestern side. They control around the north and northwestern side. And they control to some distance up these railway lines and around these towns of Stepovo and this. So the Ukrainians just can't get in there to support them. We would expect that weather conditions permitting, that in the next day or so that this Russian advance will continue until Avdeevka is certainly cut in half here. And at this stage, for any Ukrainian troops remaining in the lower part of the city, it's becoming very difficult because they are in some semi-industrial buildings. There's a railway station. There are homes there, but they are not going to be great for the Ukrainians to be fighting from for a long period of time. The reason being is that the Russians will just look to level those buildings, leaving them with nothing but broken basements to be able to hide in and fight from. Those Ukrainians in the northern coke plant will likely last a little bit longer, I guess, fare a little better, perhaps just given the nature of these large concrete and steel buildings and the reinforcement that provides. Having said that, the Russians will, of course, then be targeting these areas with Fab 500 bombs and looking to do the same thing, to effectively slowly just level the area till there's nothing above ground, making it difficult for you to fight over when you've only got basements to operate out of. So Avdeevka is very close to falling. It would seem that will happen in the coming days or week, I would suggest. Just going to talk through a little bit of the Ministry of Defence updates from the last day, and now I'm going to apologise if I manage to mess this up and lose the screen. But give me 1 second here, and I'll just play this in the background if I can. Get rid of my head. So this is some footage. This is of Novomikailiovka. This is in southwest Donetsk. And this drone footage is showing, this is apparently recent footage, is showing what the Russians have been doing here to prepare Novomikailiovka for the Russians to move in and take control of the township. What we're seeing here is TOS-1 thermobaric weapons going off. Actually, if you watch this closely, this video goes for about 3 minutes, but it's about the first minute and a half of it which shows this attack. There are a number of weapons which you can see being used in there. At one stage, it looks like there's some sort of a cluster munition goes off. Another looks as though it may be some sort of like a thermite or an incendiary explodes in one area, but it seems the majority of what we're seeing in here is either there's perhaps an incendiary sort of thing going off, but some Fab 500s and a lot of the TOS-1 flamethrower system. While this is going on, I will just go through, as I say, the update. So Russian Ministry of Defence, in the last 24-hour fighting, in the Kupiansk direction, fighting has been centering around Sinkovka and Terny. There's reports today that the Russian forces are entering the outskirts of Terny now. Ministry of Defence of Russia reports 35 Ukrainian troops lost or wounded in Kupiansk today. In Krasny Liman, here, a lot of fighting around Yampolovka, Torskoy, and the Serebryanka forestry area. Here, it's been obviously very heavy fighting with 240 Ukrainian troops reported lost, a number of armoured fighting vehicles, and one Abkhazia self-propelled artillery system destroyed. Moving into the Donetsk region, which is where the footage we're watching, and Novomikailiovka is in that southwestern area of Donetsk. Here, fighting around Klishchievka, Katerinovka, 290 Ukrainian troops reported killed and wounded. I think you can start to see that if this is one township where this level of bombardment and attack is being brought to bear by the Russians, that if this is occurring in similar weight across the front line in all of the other areas where fighting is going on, that numbers of 290 or 300 men being lost in an area in a day becomes, I think, plausible. So in Donetsk, the reporting is 290 Ukrainian troops killed or wounded, 1 tank. In the counter-battery warfare in Donetsk, an M777 howitzer, 1 M-Star-B howitzer were reportedly destroyed, as well as an AN-TPQ-50 counter-battery radar station. These counter-battery radars are used by the Ukrainians to both detect incoming shells, rockets, missiles, mortars from the Russians, and then be able to determine where they were fired from and allow them to retarget their own artillery. They're also used to be able to track their own artillery going out to see where it's landing and check that they're targeting where they want to be targeting. Losing these counter-battery radars is a big loss for the Ukrainian forces, meaning they can't then target accurately with their artillery, which over the long ranges and with Russians using mobile artillery effectively makes your artillery to some extent useless in a counter-battery warfare. If your enemy can track you and determine where you are, and you can't determine where they are, you're firing blind. In the South Donetsk region, here reports of fighting around Staromayorskoye and Yorozhne, Priyutne. Reports here are 195 Ukrainian troops killed and wounded in the last 24 hours, a tank lost, one Abkhazia and 1 Avdeevka, so 2 self-propelled artillery pieces lost in that area. Zaporozhye around Rabotny and Piatikatki. Here, the reports are 95 Ukrainian troops lost, 2 armoured fighting vehicles destroyed, 1 D-20 howitzer and another Avdeevka self-propelled artillery system. Finally, moving down to the Kherson region, in Kherson, reports are that 30 Ukrainian troops were lost in yesterday's fighting. So, again, this is a heavy day of losses. Reportedly, the numbers here are 885 men killed or wounded, 7 pieces of artillery, 4 of them being self-propelled, which are, of course, a big loss, and the 1 counter-battery radar system also reportedly destroyed. So the fighting, heavy across the front line. Really heavy, it seems, in some areas. 290, nearly 300 men reportedly killed in some of the zones of fighting. Just in terms of artillery, an interesting piece I found, this is from a Russian Telegram channel, and they're talking about the use of FPV drones on artillery and suggesting that they have a relatively low effectiveness as a means of a counter-battery warfare. So here you've got your artillery pieces, here your enemy's artillery pieces are over here. What they are suggesting, what the Russians are suggesting, is that for the Ukrainians, the FPV drones aren't particularly efficient or effective in destroying Russian artillery. And they're saying that this is because most artillery is ranged out at 15 or 20 kilometres away from frontline fighting. So if you're 15 or 20 kilometres or more away from where your drones are, your FPV drones are flying from, they're running into range issues. They can reach that range, but they need to be supported then with repeaters, repeater stations, repeater craft. Other drones are able to send the signal further for them. This report is saying that this is making them less effective in counter artillery battles, unless there are the relay or repeater drones there. And also they're saying that now what is becoming widespread is the Russian use of electronic warfare equipment, and that is also reducing the effectiveness of FPV drones, even at such distances where they don't require the repeater signal. So even at closer ranges, they're having challenges there. So, again, just an interesting piece of information. This is reportedly coming sort of from the front line. That's what the guys are reporting, that artillery conflict, at least for the Ukrainians attacking the Russian artillery, they're needing to use artillery to have the counter-battery warfare, and the use of FPV drones is not particularly effective. Zaluzhny and Zelensky, of course, we've been talking about the likelihood of a possible coup here, as President Zelensky has made it very public that he wishes to change some of his leadership. Everyone seems to believe that includes General Zaluzhny. Zaluzhny has been pushing back, saying he won't go, he won't resign. If Zelensky wants to get rid of him, he needs to fire him. Some information here. This is from one of the Ukrainian Telegram channels that I follow, and they have sources allegedly within the presidential area. They also seem to have some sources close to General Zaluzhny. Here they're saying their source close to Zaluzhny refutes the People's Deputy's information that the Commander-in-Chief agrees to go as ambassador to Britain. So these are translated. So they're saying here that their contact is saying that Zaluzhny has rejected the offering of being an ambassador to Britain. There had been talk that this is one of the things that President Zelensky was offering to General Zaluzhny for him to leave his role, was for him to go and be an ambassador. These are interesting reading some of these translated pieces. I wish that I could read Ukrainian and read Russian, but unfortunately I cannot. Because their second point then says on Bankova, so Bankova is where the parliament of the administration of Ukraine is. On Bankova, they are very afraid that Zaluzhny might voice the truth about the counteroffensive, which was pushed through at headquarters when he opposed it. So here they're suggesting that things perhaps like the failure around Bakhmut, the overinvestment of troops and resources in Bakhmut, when perhaps the Ukrainians should have been focusing on building defensive positions. Perhaps they're concerned here that if General Zaluzhny were to take an ambassadorship role, that he may end up being bad for Zelensky. Zelensky is really caught now. He's got Zaluzhny offside. There is nowhere good that he can put Zaluzhny, where he doesn't feel that Zaluzhny might somehow be a risk to him or look to undermine him. If he's the ambassador to Britain, he's over there talking to the Brits and the Americans and saying Zelensky's an idiot, he's done this wrong and that wrong and that wrong. Zelensky doesn't want that to happen. So this is why I feel there is a real opportunity for a coup, because Zaluzhny's not stupid. Zaluzhny knows there's no options for him to go somewhere else, that Zelensky's going to be happy with him. So he must feel that there may be some level of existential threat from Zelensky towards him. You know, the old exploding aircraft or falling out a window trick must be on his mind, because he could see that Zelensky doesn't want him around anywhere anymore. This gives Zaluzhny an option, and the option is he gets rid of Zelensky. And he could do this through orchestrating a military coup. He's got the tanks, after all. He's well supported in the military. He's well supported by the public. Better supported and liked by the public than President Zelensky is, it seems, in some recent Ukrainian polling. So he's in a position where he could enact that coup. Obviously, the Americans have got some concerns about this. We've seen Victoria Nuland go over and visit Kiev late last week. She clearly has gone in there to say something about what's going on, because the timing has been just after it's all become announced that looks like Zelensky wants to fire Zaluzhny. So, as I say, maybe the Americans don't want the coup yet, or they don't want Zaluzhny bumped off yet, because that would cause a lot of noise and problems for them in Ukraine while they're trying to deal with Israel and Gaza, Hamas. That is now about, I think, to increase in volume, given that there has just been what I'm sure President Netanyahu will see as some sort of a personal offence, that the Republican House idea to give $17 billion was just voted down. And now they're back in the same pool as Ukraine. If they want to try and get money, they need to somehow get that border deal locked down. As I've said before, in a video I did yesterday on why is the American border so important to Ukraine, I explained why Joe Biden's stuck, why Joe Biden is offering up these half-assed solutions, which Mike Johnson is shooting down. They're not really solutions. They're not closing down the border. He could do that now simply by saying to the Border Patrol, stop people coming across the border. By all means necessary, stop them. He's not doing that. He's still offering a deal which would allow 2 million more Democratic or likely future Democratic voters to come across the border. And that's the big reason why there is a challenge here. Israel now very unhappy that they're tied up in that mess. Ukraine also, of course, very unhappy that they're tied up in that mess. Last thing, just a note from Shoigu. So the Russian defense minister, he has spoken and just said that the Russian army retains the strategic initiative and they continue to methodically reduce the Ukrainian combat potential. Now, this has been a constant sort of refrain from Shoigu for months now. He has never gone out and said there's going to be a big offensive, Russia is going to defeat Ukraine, we will be in Kiev in 3 days. None of that has ever come from Shoigu or the Russian Defense Ministry. They have constantly been talking about a war to demilitarize Ukraine. And it seems as though he is happy where things are at the moment, that they are retaining the strategic initiative, allowing them to move forward strategically as they wish to, claiming advantages as they choose to along a plan, a strategy, and that they continue to methodically reduce the Ukrainian combat potential, which is the demilitarization. But again, him saying they're continuing to methodically reduce it. You know, these aren't just wild victories, unplanned things. They have a plan. They're moving through it systematically, is what he is suggesting in his statements. And from what we are seeing on the front line at the moment with places like Avdeevka, we are seeing that it's that slow, methodical, consistent pressure which has led to, from Avdeevka not being touched to Avdeevka being nibbled around the edges, to now today it looks like it's being split in half. And once it's split in half and that main supply road is controlled, then it's very likely that those two halves will be gobbled up very quickly. And I think that what Shoigu is saying is happening is being demonstrated on the front line. Okay, I'll leave that there. If you're enjoying the channel and you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe. I am now on X also, tweeting there, so you can catch me there. I look forward to talking to you again soon.